The storm rolled over High Mesa like an old grudge, dragging long shadows across the red earth. In Hartley County, folks said the wind could strip lies off a man's face if he stood in it long enough. Bo Kincaid never waited for the wind. He'd built his fortune by reading people the way he read weather, quiet, certain, never blinking. Kincaid Ranch spread for miles, white fences like bones, cottonwoods rattling along the creek, barns clean as courthouses. In town they called Bo the Prince of the Prairie, sometimes your lordship, if whiskey had been poured and envy loosened tongues. He wore wealth like other men wore dust, without noticing. But he had one weakness, and he kept it tucked behind an iron jaw and a precise hat brim. He couldn't stand not knowing what went on under his roof. Ever since the stampede last spring, trust had become a brittle thing. Tack went missing, a gelding turned up lame from a sabotaged gate latch, feed counted twice never tallied the same. Some ranch hand was either sloppy or stealing, and Bo's temper, slow as a river in drought, was wearing to stone. Then came the maid. Her name was Maybelle Hart. 19. 22. No one could say. She was small as a question mark and shy as a field mouse, and she arrived with a cardboard suitcase, a church note from the Reverend's wife, and a ribbon-tied bundle of references written in the tilts and loops of women who saw everything but spoke softly. Maybelle kept her chin down. When Bo first saw her in the kitchen doorway, sunlight made a pale halo around her hair. He nodded, said, "You'll keep house." She nodded back, eyes darting like swallows. The housekeeper, Mrs. Prue, ruled the mansion like a fort commander, but age had turned her ankles to glass. "Girl's a blessing," she told Bo. "Quick hands, hush feet. Doesn't spill nor snoop." Bo only grunted. He didn't believe in hush feet, he believed in proof. He slept less and watched more. Nights he'd walk the upstairs hallway, the boards complaining under his weight, and pause by the eastern landing where the ranch lamps threw a yellow pool. That was where Maybelle passed with her pail and rag, moving like a shadow learning to be a person. He noticed small things. How she folded the napkins into sleepy sailboats. How she tucked stray charcoals from the hearth into a tin as if saving each one for some secret drawing. How she would look at the grand portrait of Bo's father hanging over the stairs, Colonel Kincaid, cavalry saber flashing, and then look away quick, as if ice could burn. One afternoon he caught her at the stable door with a sugar cube hidden in her palm, coaxing his old stallion Sable to accept a bridle he hated. The horse rolled his black eye. To Bo's surprise, Sable's ears melted forward and that iron-necked devil lowered his head for the bit. "There you go, sir," Maybelle whispered, as if the horse had fought a noble duel and won the right to be gentle. She turned and nearly collided with Bo. Color climbed her throat. She ducked. "Beg pardon, Mr. Kincaid." He studied her, those small, careful hands, that soft, flinching voice. A maid that made his meanest horse soften was a card worth reading to the bottom. But he was not a man to praise quick. "Next time, ask Diego," he said, naming the head wrangler. "Sable's got a sour memory." "Yes, sir." She shouldered past, light as a rabbit. That evening, lightning stitched across the mesa, and rain came like nails. The ranch hands shut the gates and knotted the tarps. Inside, the big house breathed kerosene and thunder. Mrs. Prue retired early, her ankles wrapped, and Diego, soaked through, came to report the herd huddled fine in the southern basin. Bo nodded. He had one more problem to test before the night was over. The plan bit him with the bitter taste of pride. He told himself it was the only way to know. The petty thefts had slowed since Maybelle arrived, but sometimes it's the quiet ones who make the neatest disappearances. He'd seen it on cattle drives and in poker halls, the shyest hand often owned the quickest fingers. If someone was slipping through the house after lights out, Bo wanted the truth to walk straight to him. So he lay down on the fainting couch in his study, a long room of leather and maps where the rain made a drumline against the windows, and he left the door cracked. He removed his hat and boots, kept his shirt on, and arranged himself in the deliberate sprawl a man uses when he wants to look deeper asleep than he is. He tipped a bottle of rye into the spittoon so the room would smell honest. He pulled a wool blanket over his hip, but kept his right hand tucked at the edge, where a revolver wasn't but could have been. "Feel foolish," he muttered. "But a man who won't look foolish won't learn." The clock breathed. The storm laughed. He closed his eyes to slits and waited. Minutes stretched. Thunder talked to itself in the hills. Somewhere a window rattled like old teeth. The house changed the way houses do after midnight, timbers settling, secrets creaking. Once, Bo nearly slept for real. Then, a soft tread in the hall. Barely there. Hush feet. She came like the idea of mercy. Maybelle stood in the doorway, hair damp from steam or rain, a blue shawl clutched like a cloud at her wrists. The lamplight made her look pale as flour. For a long breath she did not move, only listened to the storm and the sleeping prince of this prairie. Bo didn't know what he expected, fingers in a drawer, a quick lift, a nervous glance toward the safe hidden behind the old painting. But she drifted past all that and went to the hearth. She knelt. She set down a small tin, that tin of charcoals. From her pocket she drew a folded scrap of paper. She pulled a coal from the tin and began to draw on the back of an old ledger page, the kind housekeepers used to balance butter and flour and soap. The storm lit the windows white, and in that stutter of light Bo saw the curve appear under her hand, horse neck, then ear, then nostril, a soft triangle of light and shadow that was exactly Sable when he let himself be seen by no one but God. Her hand moved slow, coaxing shapes from ash. Her face softened. She spoke under her breath, words too quiet to catch at first. When he finally made sense of them, it jolted him. She was apologizing. For the bit, she murmured. For the hard days. For the men who forgot to be good. And then, you're not bad, old fella. You're just scared. Her words were for the horse, but Bo felt them land where he didn't want anything landing. He told himself to cough, to rustle, to end this strange trespass. But he didn't. He watched her sketch until the paper filled with living lines, Sable's stubborn grace, the bow of the reins, the suggestion of the barn's eaves. She reached, hesitated, and then did a thing that froze him where he lay. From the shawl she unwrapped a broken leather thong. At the end of the thong, a knotted ring, thin, dented, cheap. She set it on the mantel like an offering before a church. She placed the drawing beside it. Her fingers trembled. The thunder answered. Earl, she whispered, voice catching. I won't carry you tonight. The name struck him like a thrown nail. Bo knew enough about poor men named Earl to make quick, hard guesses. He saw how her shoulders squared after she said it. He saw how she breathed, slow, then steadier, as if the act of setting that ring down was more than rest, it was trial, judgment, sentence served. She took a small lace handkerchief, mended and remended, and wiped a damp place from the corner of the mantel, careful as if she were readying a body for burial. Then she did the second thing that turned Bo to stone. She moved to him. Not near enough to touch, not that reckless, but close enough that he could smell the soft starch of her dress and a ghost of lilac from Mrs. Prue's soap. She studied his sleeping face the way a sparrow studies a hawk from a fence, a quick, tender bravado. The storm hummed. The lamp guttered. She lifted her hand, hovered it above his brow, hesitated like a prayer that dreads its own answer, then, so lightly it could have been wind, she smoothed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. I know you pretend sometimes, she breathed, almost smiling, almost brave. You pretend not to see how tired you are. You pretend not to feel when things hurt. You pretend no one can surprise you. But you let that horse eat sugar from my hand today, and I saw the boy in you who wanted to call him sweet. I won't tell. Her fingers withdrew as if burned by her own courage. She straightened. Shame and relief tangled in her cheeks. She retreated to the hearth, took up the drawing, folded it along its soft spine, and tucked it back into the shawl. But she left the ring where it lay, thin, dented, cheap, like a coin paid to cross some dark water. When she'd gone, the door breathed closed behind her. Bo kept still until the hall swallowed her footsteps and the house resumed its old, honest creaks. Then he sat up slow, the blanket sliding to his hip. His heart worked against his ribs like a rider calming a spooked mount. He stared at the mantel, at the ring waiting in its little cleared square, as if it had been set there not to shame a past, but to test a future. The rancher who never blinked didn't blink now, but the world swam anyway. He had been ready to catch a thief, instead he'd caught a confession, and one that asked nothing from him except the decency to leave it unbroken. He rose, crossed to the mantel, and studied the ring. Lightning sketched his reflection on the window, a tall man with rain in his eyes. He thought of sugar in a palm, and a stallion lowering his head. He thought of the way Maybelle had said you pretend as if it were an invitation to stop. Beau Kincaid, who owned fences that went on for miles, felt something he couldn't stake or tally, something like a fence falling down inside his chest. He didn't touch the ring. He didn't dare. He only stood there and let the storm pass through, the way a field lets the rain come and trusts what grows after. Morning rinsed the ranch clean, as if the storm had scrubbed the very air. The cottonwoods dripped, the world smelled of sage and wet saddle, and the mud wore the hoof stamps of a night endured. Beau Kincaid stood in his shirt sleeves by the study hearth with a coffee that had gone cold, regarding the small, dented ring on the mantel the way a surveyor regards a landmark he didn't put there. He didn't touch it. But he left it exactly where Maybelle's trembling fingers had placed it, centered, the bit of knotted thong looped like a tired lariat. When Mrs. Prue came shuffling in with her cane and her morning sighs, her eyes snagged on the object and then skipped away, wise as a crow. "Breakfast is soft eggs and hard talk," she announced. "Diego says there's a gate hinge on the south fence that went queer in the night. Not the storm's fault, by the look. Some hand's got a pocket full of other folks' time." "Who had the midnight watch?" Beau asked. "Hoyt till 12, Orville after. But I don't put my last biscuit on either. Hoyt's a braggart, you can hear him coming 3 counties away. Orville's too tired to scheme." Beau grunted. "Find Maybelle. Tell her to air the sheets after noon when the sun's honest. And," he stopped himself from mentioning the ring. The word tasted like a secret placed gently in his mouth. "And tell Diego I'll ride the south fence. Alone." He ate little. The dining room's wainscot still hummed with rain colth. Sable stomped in the yard beyond the windows, tossing his black head as if the storm had salted his temper. Maybelle moved through the corridor with a pail, eyes down, the shawl folded in a neat square across her arm. Her hair was braided and damp at the ends, as if she'd washed away the night and what she'd dared inside it. When she passed the door, Beau felt the air shift, like a tent flap lifting, letting in the smallest draft of lilac and starch. He found his hat. At the doorway, he paused and called without turning, "Miss Hart." Her step halted. "Sir. I'll be out near the south hinge by the cottonwoods. If you require anything, from the smokehouse or the tack room, ask Diego. I don't want you reaching into places that bite." His tone was practical as a hammer, but it carried a freight he couldn't name. "Yes, Mr. Kincaid." The soft scrape of her shoes resumed. Then, nearly swallowed by the room, "Thank you." He rode Sable despite Diego's frown. The stallion snorted but lowered his head for the bit as if some remembered gentleness made obedience taste sweeter. The land had that soaked, sullen look after hard rain, the arroyo swollen, the soil dark as coffee grounds. Beau followed the fence line and found the troubled hinge. The pin had been lifted partway and set back crooked, as if sabotaged in a hurry. Not Hoyt's sign, too delicate. Not Orville's either, too intentional. A print in the mud made him squat. Boot heel, narrow, with a chip missing from the outside edge. He knew whose boot wore that scar, Jesse Pike. A hand hired late, full of yes sirs and a gambler's eyes. Jesse smiled the way a knife smiles in sunlight. Beau turned Sable toward the barns, thoughts stacking and unstacking. Inside the stables he found Diego oiling a bridle. "Where's Jesse?" "Riding a circle he didn't get assigned," Diego said dryly. "Up at Plum Draw with Hoyt. Said he wanted to learn the lay better." He paused. "I don't like a man who wants to learn the lay too fast." "Neither do I." Beau's gaze drifted to the stall where Sable dozed, one hind hoof cocked. On the top rail, a sugar cube waited like a promise. Maybelle again. He felt a ridiculous warmth and tamped it down. "Double watch the south fence tonight. And tell the men no one comes in the big house after dark unless Mrs. Prue calls them." Diego's brows rose. "You suspect something in there?" "I suspect enough to mind the door." He stepped back into the house when the sun had scrubbed the floors with light. The ring still sat on the mantel. The house seemed to listen to it, timbers attentive. Maybelle knelt in the parlor, polishing the brass grate. The bones in her wrist showed like bird wings under skin. She glanced up and then down, but a flush traveled her neck as if the room remembered what the night had asked of her. "Mrs. Prue says I should dust the study last," she murmured, "so as not to stir your papers." Leave the mantle for me, Bo said. Yes, sir. He tried to move on, to attend to cattle and hired men and accounts, but the ring kept tugging like a fish on a far line. By noon he gave in. He stood before it and addressed it as if it were a jury that had once convicted someone in his house. I'm not a man for tokens, he told the small circle of dented metal. But I know the weight of them. He took out his pocketknife and cut a thin slice off the thong, just enough to shorten it. He flipped open the safe and removed a velvet booklet of silver dollars mint from the year his father died. With the knife, he notched one coin on its edge. He slipped the ring's thong through that notch and laid the coin behind the ring, a quiet pledge: if the ring must sit here, it would not sit alone like a punished child. It would have something of the house's wealth beside it, no ownership, not that, just company. He heard a soft gasp. Maybelle stood in the doorway with a stack of laundered linen. Her eyes went at once to the mantle, then to Bo, then down, and not quite up again. Color came and went in her cheeks. I was going to dust, she said, which was not what she had been going to do. It can wait, he said. He cleared his throat. You left something important here last night. A pause. It's safe. Her hands tightened on the linen so the cloth creaked. The storm in her seemed to gather and separate in the same heartbeat. Yes, sir. He wanted to ask Earl's shape, a drunk. A deserter? A dead man? He wanted to know if the ring was a memorial or a curse. But the gentle thing she had said to his sleeping face, I won't tell, had the force of a covenant. He would not push. A man can be better than his questions. Do you draw for long? He asked instead, surprising himself. She blinked. Sir. The horse. The charcoal. I saw the paper after you left. He lied slightly to spare her blush. He did not say he had watched her hand birth the animal from ash. It was true. Her lips parted, then pressed. Only sometimes, she whispered. When there's a shape that wants out. It helps settle the world. Good habit, he said, and meant it. The world needs settling. That evening the sky went clear as a polished spur. The mesa lay purple and quiet, a giant sleeping with one eye open. The men ate, laughed too loud, argued about a scar on the moon that some said was a buffalo and some said was a woman with a jar. Jesse Pike kept his shoulders close to the wall and his smile kept its knife. When Bo's gaze found him, Jesse's eyes slid away. Night came like a careful hand. Mrs. Prue retired with a muttered prayer. Maybelle's hush feet ghosted down the hall, then the house settled. Bo did not pretend to sleep this time. He sat in the study with the door open, polishing the walnut gunstock his father had smoothed before him. He placed the revolver on the desk, visible, heavy with the suggestion it offered, and waited for the one he wanted to catch. He heard it, a whisper of leather, soft scrape on sill. Not from the hall. From the open window above the porch roof. A cat burglar's entrance, neat as a signature. The shadow fell across the carpet. Bo's eyes did not lift from the gun. You've come to the wrong room, he said quietly. The shadow froze, then hardened into Jesse Pike, one leg over the sill, hand in his coat. Mr. Kincaid, Jesse drawled, like a man greeting Sunday. Didn't think you kept hours. Some nights I do. Door was open. Jesse's grin showed 2 teeth slightly gold. Ranch big as a county. Hard to keep track of all its corners. You've been testing them, Bo said. South hinge last night. The tack room locked the week before. Jesse's eyes didn't blink. Storm did the hinge. And who did the lock? Jesse's hand twitched in his coat, toward a holster or a knife. Bo's palm rested on the desk, still as the idea of a snake. Don't, he said. Behind Jesse, the corridor breathed, the faintest rustle. Maybelle. The thought tightened something tender and stupid in him. You step away from that window. Jesse's smile thinned. Got a man's wages to collect, he said. And there's a woman in this house who owes somebody something. Folks leave tokens when they owe. His glance flicked to the mantel and the small circle there. Seems a cheap debt, if you ask me. Bo stood. His chair legs whispered on the rug. I didn't. Jesse weighed him, calculated the distance to the gun, to the window, to the hall. In a different house, with a different man, Jesse would have tried for it. In this house, with Bo Kincaid's unblinking gaze fixed on him, Jesse swallowed his fight. He eased his leg back over the sill, palms raised like a show of good manners. "No harm, Mr. Kincaid," he said lightly. "Just finding how the night breathes." "It breathes fine without you," Bo replied. "You're done here. Ride at dawn. No pay for this week, and lucky with that." Jesse's eyes cooled. Men who fire without a reason find reasons fired at them. Take your warning to someone who scares. Jesse's gaze flicked to the mantel again, as if drawing a map of weakness, and then away. "Dawn, then," he said, and vanished into the dark as neat as a note tucked under a door. Silence returned with a pulse. From the hall came a small, frightened breath. Maybelle stood there, one hand at her throat, bare feet pale against the runner. I heard, it's done," Bo said. His voice came gentler than he knew it could. "Go back to your room." Her eyes slid to the mantel. The ring and the silver dollar sat like two moons on a small horizon. The sight steadied her, or maybe it remade the edge of her shame into something companioned. "Thank you," she whispered. He almost told her about Jesse and the boot print and the hinge pin, about how men like that would find another ranch to bleed. He almost told her that the ring could stay as long as she needed it to sit there holding its watch. Instead he picked up the wool blanket from last night's fainting couch and held it out like a flag that meant safe. "Take this," he said. The night turned thin. She hesitated. But her fingers brushed his as she took the blanket, and both of them felt it, the hush of a promise that hadn't been spoken yet but could be, if the days went a certain way. "Good night, Mr. Kincaid," she said. "Good night, Miss Hart." The house breathed. The moon climbed the stairs of the sky and paused on the landing like a curious child. Down in the pasture, Sable nickered at nothing in particular. Bo sat again in the study, watched the window, and kept company with a ring and a coin and the fine, fragile feeling of not pretending. Morning gave way to weeks, and weeks began to build their own rhythm. Maybelle worked quiet as a prayer through the halls. Bo watched with the same patience he used on cattle storms, never pushing, just steady. The ring stayed on the mantel beside the silver dollar. Nobody asked about it, yet everybody noticed. Symbols like that don't go unseen in a house. Jesse Pike was gone, riding south with his grin sharpened to revenge, but Bo knew trouble like him had a way of circling back. For now the ranch ran smoother. Fences stayed straight, the ledgers balanced, the men worked without too much whiskey in them. But inside the house something else was stirring, slow, tender, uninvited, like a wildflower sneaking up through cracked stone. One evening, Mrs. Prue dozed early, and Diego kept the men busy with a new corral gate. The house fell still. Bo found himself in the kitchen, boots on the worn plank floor, listening to the faint clatter of dishes. Maybelle was there, sleeves rolled, humming something too soft to name. Her braid had come loose, and strands clung to her cheek with steam from the kettle. "Storm coming?" Bo asked, nodding toward the window where clouds bruised the horizon. She jumped, nearly dropping the plate. "Oh, no, sir. Just supper dishes." "I meant the sky," he said gently. "Not the plates." Color rushed to her face. She set the plate down carefully, as if to hide the tremor in her hands. "Maybe a small one. They always pass." He stepped closer, slow so as not to spook her. The kitchen smelled of soap, wood smoke, and a trace of lilac. "I've been meaning to ask you, Miss Hart," he said. "That ring, does it belong to a man who'll come looking?" She froze. The hum of the kettle seemed to grow louder. For a long moment she kept her eyes on the basin. Then she shook her head. "No one's coming." He waited, but silence pressed between them like another wall. She swallowed. "It belonged to Earl. He was my husband. If you can call him that. He's buried out near Dry Creek. Left me with the scar of his name, nothing else." Her voice cracked but didn't break. She turned then, meeting Bo's eyes with a defiance that trembled but held. "I left it on the mantel so I wouldn't have to wear it anymore. If you think that makes me wicked, you can send me away too." Bo studied her, the damp strands of hair, the clenched fists, the small woman standing her ground in the heart of his house. He felt the ache of all the times he had pretended not to care. Slowly, he shook his head. No, Maybelle. That doesn't make you wicked. That makes you brave. Her breath hitched, and she turned back to the basin quick, shoulders tight. But when he laid a hand gently on the back of the chair beside her, not touching her, just close enough, her trembling eased. That night the storm came hard. Rain hammered the roof, wind shoved at the shutters. Bo lit a lantern and carried it down the hall, finding her at the window of the maid's small room. She stood watching the lightning split the mesa, face pale in the glow. Scared? He asked. She shook her head, though her hands twisted the blanket edge. Not of storms. Just of being alone in them. He set the lantern down. Firelight filled the little room. Then, after a long pause, he sat in the chair by the door and spoke like a man setting down a heavy saddle. Then you won't be alone tonight. Not while I'm here. They didn't touch, not yet. They didn't need to. The silence between them softened, stitched together by stormlight and the slow trust of two scarred souls daring to sit close without running. The storm had passed, but it left the earth raw and shining. Morning sun spilled across the mesa like a slow blessing. Maybelle moved through the big house with her usual quiet steps, but something had changed. She carried the blanket he'd given her, folded neatly in her arms, as if it were a secret she had borrowed and would never quite return. That night's closeness lingered in Beau's chest. He had kept his word, sat in the chair by her door until the storm softened into sleep, lantern dimming to a whisper. He had not touched her, nor she him. But the silence they shared had stripped something from both of them, the old armor of pretending not to feel. 2 evenings later, as the ranch cooled to the sound of crickets, Maybelle found him in the stable. Sable stood calm under her hands, head bowed like a giant that had surrendered only to her. She stroked his neck with small circles, her lips moving as if in some quiet conversation. You speak to him like a man, Beau said, stepping into the lantern's circle. She startled but did not pull away. He listens better than most men. The answer made Beau's mouth twitch, though he did not let it grow into a smile. He stepped closer, palm against the horse's shoulder. He listens because you're not afraid of his scars. Her hand stilled. Her eyes lifted slowly, catching his. Something in them dared him to speak further, dared him to see what she usually kept hidden. And then, with a bravery that looked like trembling, she drew the shawl aside from her collarbone. The lantern showed it, an old scar running jagged across her shoulder, pale but angry in its shape. Earl left that one. He said I'd never be fit for anyone's eyes again. Her voice was steady, though it carried all the years she had borne the words. Said the world would turn away if I ever showed it. Beau's jaw worked. He didn't speak quick, he let silence have its moment, the way you give a wounded animal time before reaching. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. He paused a breath from her skin, letting her choose. When she gave the smallest nod, he brushed his rough fingers lightly along the edge of the scar. Looks to me, he said, voice low, like a place you healed stronger than the rest. Her eyes closed, a breath leaving her as if she had been holding it for years. For the first time since he'd known her, she didn't step back. She leaned into that touch, not as a woman begging, not as a servant yielding, but as someone allowing herself to be seen, scar and all. The horse shifted softly, stamping once, as if sealing the moment. It was late August when Jesse Pike rode back into Hartley County. Folks in town said they saw him at the saloon, nursing whiskey with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Beau heard it from Diego 2 days later, after a supply run. He's sniffing around again, the foreman warned. Said words about debts unpaid. Beau's jaw tightened. He won't come near this ranch. But he knew men like Jesse. They carried grudges like burrs under a saddle, small but sharp, riding a man raw until he bled. It was only a matter of time before Jesse turned his smile back toward the Kincaid spread, or worse, toward the girl who had left her shame on Beau's mantle. That evening, Beau found Maybelle by the clothesline. The sun was sinking, turning sheets into pale sails against the blood-orange sky. She was pinning them with careful fingers, humming again, that same tune he never quite caught. He stepped closer. Maybelle. She turned, braid catching the light. Yes, sir. There may be trouble coming. Jesse Pike's back in town. Her hand froze on the clothespin. For a heartbeat her eyes flicked toward the house, toward the study window where the ring and silver dollar still kept watch. Then she steadied herself. Do you want me to leave? The question struck him harder than Jesse's threats ever could. No, he said firmly. You're safe here. Safer than anywhere else. She searched his face, as if testing the truth of those words. Slowly, she nodded. Then I'll stay. I've run enough in my life. That night Bo doubled the watches. He sat long in the study again, not pretending this time, but keeping real vigil. The ring caught the lamplight, a dented circle of survival, and for the first time Bo realized it wasn't just Maybelle's burden anymore, it was theirs, held in common, as if the shame had been halved. When the attack came, it came sudden. A crash at the barn, shouts from the men, horses screaming. Bo grabbed his revolver and strode out into the dark. The moon lit the yard in harsh silver. Jesse Pike and two shadows were trying to cut loose Sable, rope tangled round the stallion's neck. Step away, Bo's voice cut through the chaos. Jesse turned, knife gleaming. Thought I'd collect something this ranch owes me. You'll collect lead if you move another inch, Bo growled. The men froze, but Sable thrashed, rearing against the rope. And then, Maybelle's voice cut through the din, sharp and steady. Sable, she called. Easy, boy. It's me. The stallion stilled, wild-eyed turning toward her. The rope slipped from Jesse's hand as the horse pressed back toward the stable, refusing to move without her. That single act, the beast siding with the maid, broke the moment. Diego and the hands rushed forward, guns raised. Jesse spat, backing into the shadows. This ain't done, he hissed. Then he and his men vanished into the dark. Silence fell heavy. Bo lowered his gun, breath ragged. He turned to Maybelle, who stood trembling but unbroken in the yard, the moon silvering her braid. He crossed to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, not to guide, not to claim, but to steady. You saved more than the horse tonight, he said. Her eyes shone. I only called him. You called him, Bo murmured, and he chose you. The men watched, silent, their earlier doubts dissolving in that single, undeniable act of loyalty. The crowd that had once whispered about the unwanted maid now stood with heads bowed, as if the ranch itself had answered on her behalf. The yard was still buzzing after Jesse's retreat, the ranch hands whispering in knots, Diego cursing under his breath while checking the gates. But Bo's world had narrowed to the woman beside him, trembling yet standing, her hand resting on Sable's muzzle as though her will alone had steadied the storm. In the lamplight of the study later, Maybelle sat rigid in a chair while Bo placed the dented ring in her palm. It doesn't belong to him anymore, he said, voice quiet but firm. Not if you don't want it to. She stared at the small circle, scarred and bent, the weight of years pressing into her skin. It was the mark he left, she whispered. Proof that I was less than nothing. Proof I was his to shame. Bo leaned forward, elbows heavy on his knees. You're no man's shame, Maybelle. You proved that tonight. His eyes held hers, unblinking, steady as the mesa. That ring can stay a curse, or it can turn into something else. You decide. Her hands shook, but she rose, walked to the hearth, and placed the ring in the fire. For a moment the metal glowed, then softened, then curled upon itself like a dying snake. She stood with her shoulders square, watching it burn. When she turned back, her eyes shone not with tears, but with the light of a burden laid down. Bo stepped beside her. Slowly, with a reverence neither had expected, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss not to her mouth, not to her skin, but to the scar that crossed her shoulder. The scar that once marked her unfit, now sealed by tenderness into a badge of survival. Outside, the men who had doubted her kept their silence. Not one whispered against her again. They had seen the stallion choose her, the fire burn away her shame, and the rancher bow his head over her scar as if it were holy ground. Weeks later, a garden grew behind the house, small and stubborn, Maybelle's doing. She planted herbs and beans and flowers that made no money but gave fragrance to the air. Bo often found her there in the evening, dirt on her fingers, hair loose around her face. He would join her, not speaking much, only handing her water or pulling weeds. Love grew there, the kind that takes root through work and patience, not quick bloom. One night, as the lamps flickered on and the mesa turned blue with dusk, Bo reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. Their fingers wove together like threads mending a tear. Storms come and go, he murmured. But something always grows after, she answered. The cabin windows glowed with firelight, and in the silence of the prairie the world seemed to pause, two scarred souls bound not by shame, but by survival, by tenderness earned the hard way. And so the tale of the maid no one wanted, and the cowboy who pretended to sleep, became a story whispered like a folk song. What keeps a heart alive in the desert? A kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go.